Hello and welcome back to TDWrites. I'm your host Peter Vaughn, and I'm recording this week on the road. I can't take it anymore. I can't stay cooped up inside my house, so I have taken my journey out by foot, just gonna keep walking. And I've made it pretty far so far. I'm recording this episode from Ohio. It's nice here. There's nothing around. I don't know if anyone actually lives in this state, but I am in Ohio and it's nice. Just wanted to check in and record an episode. Thank you so much for all the positive messages, all the kind compliments and whatnot and etceteras that you have sent me about last episode, and it made me really want to do another one. So let's do another one, shall we? Let's dive into some neat stories, neat poems. Maybe we'll have a guest on. In today's episode, we'll be doing a poem called The Grave, a short story called The Bard to Be, a song/story called Unending, and we'll be finishing it off with a chapter from my novel called Spring Day. The Grave. I decided to take you. You had to see him. We went at night. He would have liked that. You held my hand. Some of the dead saw us. He stayed dead. Thank God for that. We stood at the gravestone, and you looked to me. It's you said. And I shook my head. It's who I used to be. The Grave is one of the shortest poems I ever wrote, but I really like it. I feel like my poetry does a lot of storytelling. With this poem I wrote last week and this one, just does a lot of storytelling. You don't know who these 2/3 characters are, but I don't know, it's just, I really like it. You learn a lot about whoever is in the grave. He likes the night. Whoever he is, the main character, the narrator, wants him to stay dead. I like it a lot. Makes me think about putting to death the old self and always becoming a new person, always bettering yourself, always striving for something new. I'm not necessarily the main character, but I could be. And I think anyone could be. Also a little romantic. It's a weird sort of date. I'm not sure how do you feel, dear listener, about bringing people to graves or whatnot, visiting graves? Like, I'm always wondering, am I gonna bring my future kids to my mom's grave or something like that? Or am I gonna just bring friends to my mom's grave? I don't know. I like the idea of visiting graves. Us writers are strange folk. I mean, that's what I gather. It's not often I meet someone who doesn't write. The town I live in is small. About 24 or so makeshift houses reside around a pond. We all rise in the morning, bathe in the pond, eat a light breakfast, and get to work. We write. Our town is completely populated by people whose passion is writing. We have poets, storytellers, songwriters, keepers of history, and the like. I, of course, am a storyteller, a bard, if you will. Once a week, a caravan comes through. With them comes a fisherman, a baker, a lumberjack, a butcher. Most of the professions come through to buy and sell. I've only sold one story so far. I've been in this town for nearly 3 years now. Thankfully, my neighbors share their excess food sometimes. Once a man or woman reaches 18 years of age, they leave their family and then live in the town of their passion. Our country is large, and many small towns such as this one are spread out amongst the country. I see my family for the holidays, but I rarely otherwise see them. My father is a repairman, and my sister still lives with him. My mother used to be a baker, rest her soul. Our town is full of unusual quirks. If one should venture out of doors in the very early morning, one would notice lamps still lit inside one or two of the homes, their owners busy scribbling away. Parchment often littered the street. The occasional quill was found floating in the pond. One day when the caravan comes by, I wish to join them on their quest. A bard is not very good at his job if he stays in his hometown his entire life. I wrote these stories, but rarely share them. I envision it now. I'm standing beside a monstering fire, children sitting at my feet. The light of the flame dances off their faces. Parents stand and listen as well as I delve into the tale of an adventure, of mythical creatures, and of the wonder of the king. How that would fill me with joy. That short story was called The Bard to Be. I like bards. That's a word we don't use often enough. A bard is a storyteller, a traveling storyteller, goes from town to town and tells stories, sings songs. I feel like that's what I'm doing here. Being a bard, telling my tales. So yeah, I like to describe myself as a bard, and I like writing about bards. And I like this young bard, this 18-year-old bard. And I identify with him a lot. I feel like I identify with almost everyone I write about. I identify with this bard because he loves writing, obviously, but also is just a little bit unnoticed. Wants more people to hear his tales, his stories, his songs. And standing at a bonfire, having kids and parents alike just listening to your tales, and it sounds so cool. And it's also an interesting concept, like having a country where every town is inhabited by a different profession. This is interesting. I wonder how that would work. I don't know. I just wrote the tale. Like I mentioned, every story that I write, every poem I write isn't mine. It's the death of the author. It is the reader's or the listener's interpretation. So if you have any ideas how this sort of concept would work, having different people of different professions living in their own separate towns, that's really interesting. This next one I recorded a few months ago on video, so it might sound a little bit different, but it's still me, just a month or two ago. It was a beautiful spring day, which was a great relief to Rupees. The past few months of his training to become a knight did not become easier because there was snow on the ground. No, indeed. The bitter colds served as yet another trial the students had to overcome, and Rupees thanked the king that had passed. Flowers bloomed in the townspeople's flower pots. The trees had leaves again, and when the sun peeked out from behind a building, its warmth would fill Rupees with contentment. This was Rupees' favorite time of the year. Today was the weekly day of rest, and the city took advantage of it. Kids ran down the streets, their parents chasing after them with smiles on their faces. Numerous streets had different performances set up, with people singing for their fellow citizens and their king. New paintings appeared on the walls of various buildings, the previous year's art being worn away by the winter. Instead of the usual stands in stores selling goods, they gave away some of the excess they had been given. It was a time to bless and a time to be blessed. Rupees stopped on one of the main avenues and talked with Senior Catchet, who reminded Rupees once again that he had known him since he was a wee little baby. Many of the king's people just loved to pull a person aside and have a nice long talk. Rupees, however, just liked to listen. After Senior Catchet finished telling Rupees about a battle he fought in when he was Rupees' age, Rupees excused himself to continue wandering the city. He soon found Pia, who had promised to spend some time with him outside of the academy. They both enjoyed being together, as friends who had grown close through the slight hardship that was the night training. Rupees' mind wandered as they walked through the memories they had of the academy. Pia stopped for a moment. "Look at this, Rupees." On the wall of the local market, where most of the fresh produce was sold, was a poster. This was not odd, of course, because the market was teeming with posters for different shops or performances. This poster was headed by big, bold letters that read, "Annual Music Festival." Pia instantly looked to Rupees in excitement. A bell tolled twice in the distance, which meant only one thing: dinner. The two adolescents talked as they walked. "Have you ever been to a festival, Rupees?" she asked. Rupees nodded. "When I was a child, yes. It's been quite a few years since I've been, however." Pia put on a mock look of disappointment. "Oh, I've been every year. It's a family tradition. Last year, a friend and I even performed in the show." That surprised Rupees. "You play music?" Pia blushed in response. "Well, I do play the lute, but as a matter of fact, I sang in a choir last year. It was actually sweet," she said, mildly lost in the memories. "I have a drum I sometimes play," Rupees offered. "Alas, I wish I had known about your choir's performance. That was only a few months before we met," Rupees said. "Indeed it was. On that note, what do you say?" Pia asked as Rupees opened one of the doors to the keep for her. "What do I say about what?" The two youths settled into a table towards the corner of the feast hall. Stained glass windows let in some of the fiery evening sun. "What do you say about performing?" "We could do a song together if you want," Pia said with a tone like she half expected him to say yes. "Well, I don't know. I'm not too comfortable in front of a crowd, to be honest. I love to go watch others perform, but I may pass on the opportunity to make a fool of myself," Rupees explained, rubbing his neck. "Oh, I know you wouldn't make a fool of yourself. I think it could be a very merry time if you just give it a chance. Just this once, and then you'll never have to do it with me again should you feel too scared," she poked. Rupees shot a glance at her, but couldn't remain serious, and a small grin crept onto his face. She smiled too. "I really don't know, Pia," he said. He knew it would be a bad idea. From across the table, Pia put down her fork and looked Rupees in the eyes, putting on the most innocent face she could muster. Rupees knew what she was doing. Stop it," he said, another grin forming. "Just that thing you're doing with your eyes. Stop that." "Please, Rupees?" Pia asked him. Rupees sighed and took a bite of a steak. "All right, just this once," he relented. Pia let out a whoop as she dug into her meal. Before the pair returned to their bedrooms, they discussed some details about their performance. Pia offered to play her lute, and Rupees would bring his hand drum. They didn't choose a song, but Pia said that they would likely choose tomorrow after night training. She also decided that the two would practice every day after their chores and their training. Rupees lay in his bed that night, utterly terrified. As the two youth ran around the castle the next day, Rupees noticed that Pia never ran out of breath as she laid out some options for songs to perform. She wasn't sure if they should write a song or if they should use a song already written, and if so, which song should they sing? "Perhaps we could sing a song of praise to the king? Or maybe something silly. There is that song about the clumsy dragon that you love, right, Rupees?" Perhaps a lament to our lost friends and family, or some melancholy tune about life. Pia continued to think out loud next to Rupees. Pia, if you continue to talk during a run, I believe I may run short of breath on your behalf, he said. Pia shot him a smirk and punched his shoulder. Onward she talked about the performance, and Rupees chuckled and tried to ignore the stitch in his side. The sky had turned a magnificent pink by the time the adolescents had settled down with their lute and drum. Pia gave her lute a few plucks of the strings and strummed it softly. Rupees simply followed her lead. The sound of her hums flowed sweetly with the beautiful instrument. His hand hit the drum and let out a low beat. Rupees then acted naturally and accompanied Pia's music with a beat of his own. His hands flowed across the instrument on their own accord. Rupees played almost unconsciously, enough so that he could pay attention to the words Mia began to softly sing. Mia Plamira, Mia Plamira, Mia Plamira, Paunomo, Daiko Sinai, Daiko Sinai, Daiko Sinai, San Plamira. Pia continued to strum her lute. Rupees didn't say anything. He didn't recognize the language, nor the song, so he was unsure if the song had been completed. A few moments passed. What does that song mean? Rupees asked when Pia didn't continue. She shrugged and stopped playing. My mother sang it to me as a child. It was one of the first songs I ever learned to play. I have no idea what it means, Pia said. Rupees chuckled and slapped his drum a few times lightheartedly, and she smiled as well. Although, I think if we were going to play a song for the festival, it should be one that our fellow Lacendians should understand, should it not? Pia asked, and Rupees nodded. It should indeed. Perhaps a song a tad cheerier? Your song was beautiful, but perhaps too quiet for the festival. Pia agreed, and the two youth brainstormed ideas for the approaching concert. The two youth never failed to meet daily, practicing different songs for consideration or just to have a good time. And Rupees had to admit, spending time playing music with Pia was much more enjoyable than he thought it would be. A wave of melancholy came over him when the time for the festival came. He realized that they wouldn't be playing together much afterwards. Rupees met Pia at a fountain in the center of the keep, which was open to the sky. Pia wore a tan dress, and Rupees could notice that she took extra time that night to make sure her hair cooperated with her. Her long, straight hair ran down her back, and it was even and straight, a change that suited her well. Rupees wore a collared dress tunic. He never enjoyed dressing up for occasions, the frill around his cuffs and collar being one especially prevalent reason at the present moment. But when he needed to, he cleaned himself up and did what he had to in order to look presentable. Under one arm, he carried his drum, and he carried Pia's lute in the opposite hand. Pia wore an enormous smile as they walked through the keep and down the streets of Lacendia. Next to her, however, Rupees grew steadily more nervous. He could feel his heart pump faster than it normally did, and he was starting to become sweaty. Being the good friend that she was, Pia knew that Rupees was nervous and constantly reminded him that nothing bad would happen during the show. I'll tell you this again, Rupees. The crowd will love us. We can do it. Just trust me, she said. Rupees honestly hadn't paid much attention to the other performances, and later would not be able to recount what tales they sung. All too quickly for his liking, he and Pia strolled out onto the stage, met with a welcoming applause. 2 seats sat out in the middle of the stage, a welcoming sight for Rupees. At the very least, I do not have to stand, he thought. The 2 youths sat, and Rupees looked to Pia, and then down at his drum. Whispering just barely loud enough for Rupees to hear her, Pia counted the 2 musicians down. 3, 2, 1. Rupees' hand hit his drum as Pia sang her first word, her lute resting unplayed in her lap. The quest for glory draws many from across the land, quest for power or gold or the fair maiden's hand. But there is the quest for vengeance, to seek with intent for death, to kill, wound, slaughter, that can bring upon one's last breath. Take by chance the worm, which is a noble beast, that the man sought to kill, for upon his remains the mice would feast. Pia joined Rupee's drum with her lute, and as the chorus of their song began, the two youths joined their voices. That worm, it has harmed you not, an enemy you have made, or an enemy you thought. The crowd, to Rupee's surprise, laughed within a few moments of the chorus. He briefly turned his head to see behind him a man running past, holding a tarp in front of him with both hands. Painted on the tarp was a large red dragon, and following closely behind it was a small child, holding a wooden sword, raising it in mock anger. Rupees looked at Pia, who playfully winked her eye as she sang. As the chorus finished, Rupees couldn't help but let out a laugh before it was his turn to sing. That man searched far, and indeed he searched wide, but little did he realize his enemy was inside. The dragon flew high, above the man's harm, but when conflict finally arose, his cheeks became quite warm. The crowd broke into another fit of laughter, and Rupees turned to see the child knight cowering before the tarp with the dragon on it. Rupees and Pia broke into the second round of their chorus. That worm, it has harmed you not, an enemy you have made, or an enemy you thought. Rupees let his drum go silent for a moment as he raised his arms in the air, clapping them above his head. The onlookers understood his meaning and clapped on along with the rhythm. Rupees beamed in joy while Pia began to sing. Oh man, why hate me so? No hate do I bring, why am I your foe? The man in his fear looked up to the worm, but due to his size he could only squirm. Neither drum or lute played, and the crowd quickly quieted it as well. Rupees and Pia sang without aid of instrument. Oh man, look upon my face. I offer you this chance. Please accept my grace. That worm, the one you once had fought, a friend he now is, an enemy he is not. The child behind the two musicians threw his wooden sword to the ground and instead walked forward and wrapped his arms around the tarp. Rupees beat on his drum and Pia played her lute again as the final verse began. The man now lives with the worm, and they live well. All because a piece of grace, no magic, no spell. That worm, a lifelong friend he is. Glory was not needed, what you needed was this. 3 final plucks of the lute and 3 pounds of the drum, and the stage was instantly silenced. The festival broke into applause, and Rupees let out a sigh of relief. He looked to Pia, who was absolutely ecstatic, and she mouthed the words, "We did it." Rupees nodded and stood with her, calling the dragon and the young knight forward as well. The 4 all bowed and exited off the stage. Unable to resist, Rupees immediately turned to Pia. "Now you fail to mention this to me," Rupees said, motioning to the armored child. "A small surprise. I thought you'd appreciate it," she replied. He smiled. "I certainly did. I think we did well," he said. Pia nodded, setting her lute down on a table. "Now, as I promised, you never have to do that again. I won't make you next year. I'll just have to," she let out a loud, exaggerated sigh, "have to find someone else to sing with next year." Rupees laughed. "Just because you won't make me next year doesn't mean it won't happen," he said with a wink. They both shared another laugh and wrapped their arms around each other in celebration. So yeah, Spring Day from Between Nights. I think that's chapter 7 of Between Nights, so that's pretty early on. Yeah, sometimes you have chapters in the book, and especially in the sequel, which will come out whenever, I don't know. But sometimes you have chapters that just stand on their own, and that's one of them. About Rupees and Pia, 2 main characters who go to play the song. And like I mentioned earlier, all my stories have some aspect of me. All my characters have some aspect of me. Rupees, stage fright. I'm stage fright. I can't really get up in front of people and talk. Or at least it's pretty hard for me. I'm getting better at it, but like when I was Rupees' age in the story, he was 17? I just couldn't do it. Rupees plays a drum, I play a drum. Yeah, I don't know. I like it a lot. It's a funny story. Um, Actually, that story used to be something completely different. It used to be the first part was all the same, but then afterwards it was revealed that it would be a little like Hunger Games type event in the city. And as I was writing that story, I was like, it just isn't landing right. Because in the book, there's a few like mock invasion attempts and mock battles. So I thought another one would just get too stale. So I wrote it instead as a music festival. I think it really turned out a lot better than it would have otherwise.
The words of God echoed in her mind. That wasn't unusual, as everything he said held power beyond comprehension. But these words were the most recent, the freshest words she had heard. He won't be able to hear you. He won't be able to see you. All you can do is give him a memory, a whisper of his past. These are his darkest hours. And I am sending you to bring light back to his life. After that, she found herself sitting at the piano, though it had felt like thousands of millennia to her, and at the same time, it felt like only a couple of seconds. In reality, it had been 2 years since she had died. The memories of her life on this planet came flooding back. Oh, how she loved this piano. It had a broken key, and it wasn't quite as magnificent as other grand pianos. The woman had many fond memories of sitting at this piano, her husband at her side. The tops of the keys had worn their paint where her fingers would rest. She lightly rested her hands on the keys, the weight of her hands just barely depressing the instrument. There were so many instruments in heaven, and she realized that she could play each and every one of them. She loved to make music to worship her king, to dance and to sing and offer up a song of praise. Joy overflowed inside of her every time she saw God smile when she played. But here she was, sitting back at her old piano. Then he slowly walked into the room. He had been crying, at least somewhat recently. He shuffled over to the dresser in the dining room and picked up a photograph that was resting on the top. The picture was of their honeymoon, only 6 years prior. Life and happiness was in both of their eyes, telling just how much they had loved each other. The man couldn't bear looking for too long and put the picture down again. Grief had been hard on him. He would feel healed for a day, maybe even a week, and then something would remind him of his late wife, a song or a picture, sometimes even a quote from one of her old movies. The memories were just too unbearable for him, and the grief followed him like an unwanted cat. She looked at the man, and she loved him. Not with the same love of the photograph. No, that had faded away. The love she now felt was stronger. This man, right now, was so beautiful, so unique, and so hurting. He had a big hole in his life that needed filling, and she knew what to do. Taking a shallow breath out of habit, not necessity, the woman played her first chord, and the sound of the dusty piano strings filled the room. The man was startled at first. To him, the seat was empty. It was as if the piano began playing itself. Her hands flew across the piano, and the old songs she had written came flooding back to her. She only wrote one, but it had meant so much to her. Each note came as easy as existing for her, and the words soon followed. With wide eyes, her husband, only watched the keys move up and down of their own accord. No matter how much I love you, I can never match that love. No, no matter how much I love you, I can never match the love of God. Oh, the love, the unending love, the unending love of God. He sent his son, the perfect one, in the unending love of God. The husband had taken a few steps forward. He recognized the chords, but he didn't hear her words. She hoped he would get the message. His eyes were so empty. She launched into the next verse, and she couldn't help but smile. Though you mean the world to me, the Father gave up his world. My love fails to compare to that. I can never match the love of God. And then, though no sound came out, her husband's lips began to move with the chorus. Oh, the love, the unending love, the unending love of God. He sent his son, the perfect one. Oh, the unending love of God. She felt the pull back to heaven. It was like a rope pulling on her stomach. Still, she felt she had to finish the song. Though one day I die and leave this earth, Jesus will never leave thee. His love will remain day after day. I can never match the love of God. Finally, her husband was singing, though tears were streaming down his face. She felt only joy. She knew that God was smiling somewhere up there. Though the tug back was strong, she continued to sing. Oh, the love, the unending love, the unending love of God. He sent his son, his only one, the unending love of God. Her finger hit the final two notes as she released her pull, falling into the piano and landing feet first back in paradise. The brilliance of God filled existence itself. Did I do well? She asked humbly. Like the break of dawn, her father smiled, and he simply said, well done, my good and faithful servant.
All right. So, thanks a lot, Rob.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, I love this story. This is a great story. Go ahead.
That was a little bit more than I expected, honestly. It was like it's really deep.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of stories come from deep places, sometimes pain, sometimes joy. This is a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I could only imagine, man. I mean, what was like the source for you, like, that inspired this?
So the writing prompt, you saw this, but the writing prompt for this one is on Halloween. A beautiful medley is emanating from the piano in your living room. Upon entering the room, you observe the keys are moving on its own. The piece is familiar. You slowly begin to realize it's your wife's composition. And I write a lot of stories based on prompts and everything like that. I love stories about heaven and what happens in heaven and everything like that. A lot of the stories I wrote in my very first collection of short stories were about heaven and the afterlife. And I recognize this is completely fiction. It's not anywhere based in the Bible or anything like that.
Yeah.
I don't think God would be sending people back to Earth to play music. But I just think it's such a cool concept, like a comfort. Like, God knows exactly what this guy needs, and right now it's his late wife.
Yeah. It's funny because I've been reading through Revelation, and it's like really interesting. Just the topic of heaven and what happens after this earth and so forth has been on my mind a lot.
Yeah, I'm really excited for it. And I also like writing songs, but I don't know how to write music. So I just write the words. But I really like this song. This is a good song, I think.
Yeah, I would fully agree. I was reading and I was like, is this a song that already exists already? Because I was like, this sounds amazing. There's a lot of worship music I have not heard. So I was like,
Yeah, I completely wrote this song.
Yeah, by the end of it, I was like, Peter has to have written this because it's just so, like, I just had never heard that before, and I really like it. I think it's really great. You should pass it on to Mindy or somebody to
Yeah, I
put
might.
the instrumental together.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's like, it's hauntingly beautiful, like the sound of it. There's just so much truth in it. I really just love. I love. I mean, obviously, I feel like anyone who's a believer um, loves the not concept, because I believe it's more than just a concept, but loves subject matter revolving around a relationship, a romantic relationship, a marriage, um, two people who are pursuing God first, and that's their source of that love and that security. But there is still that love between the two people, and it's just really cool the way that you told that through that song.
Mm.
How that is like the proper way to prioritize love in order to have something that will be long lasting on earth, with another human being that isn't, of course, imperfect. You can never expect them to fully give the love that God can only give. And that song really, it touches on that, like from a lover to from one person to their lover, writing a song that is romantic but yet refocusing back onto God.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy. I like it.
Yeah, and I like to incorporate the title of the story into the work. I usually name it after, so the title of the story is fittingly Unending. I think that's the most important word in this story is unending. The unending love of God.
Yeah, man. I think that sounds like a good I don't know if you'd want to put yourself out there like that, but dude, I would hold on to this one to sing on a wedding day.
Maybe, yeah. I've
It's a
got
great
the like
song and
general melody in my head,
poem.
but
Yeah,
I don't think I could sing the entire thing.
it's a
Maybe.
great song and or poem.
Yeah,
It's gonna sing.
that poems are just songs.
Yeah, dude. I mean, honestly, dude, that's like it's so beautiful. It's like so showing um, of like your heart in that song. Like it's really cool, man. Like I would, dude, I wish I had something like that.
Mm.
That's dope. It's really dope.
And that's our show for today. Episode 2 in the books, in the bag, in the pockets, whatever you want to put the episode, it's in there. Thank you so much to our special guest reader today, Rob. You can find him on Instagram at Mitchell Media LLC. And you can find me, your host, Peter, at TDW Fan on Instagram, also on Twitter at TDW Fan, or alternatively at TDWrites. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to be a guest reader, get in contact with me on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook Messenger or by writing me a letter, something. Get in contact with me. I'd love to have you read on my podcast, whoever you are out there. If you have a comment on one of the different stories, get in contact with me. I'd love to talk about my writing with you. Yeah, and thank you so much for listening. It really means the world to me. Thanks a bunch. Thanks so much. Thanks for everything. Thank you for being you. We'll see you next time on the next episode of TDWrites. This is TDW.
She only wrote one note, but it had meant so much to her. She had only wrote one, but it had meant so much to her. I have a problem with adding words that aren't there.
It's all right.
I'm just glad that I realize it. No, you're totally fine. Sincerely, ours.
TDWrites.com/TDW fan.